Hi, welcome back to Cambridge Inside Out. I'm Judy Nathans,
And I'm Robert Winters.
and it's still January 18th.
It
For those of
still
you
is.
keeping track of our show. Okay.
Right. Now, if we were to broadcast for a continuous 24 hours, the date might change mid-show, but
Oh,
that's not the case.
not on my watch. No
Right.
way. I'm not
Exactly.
filibustering. Maybe I don't want to talk about filibuster. It's hard to understand, but maybe they should go back. They have to talk for as long as you have to. But I don't
I
know.
wouldn't mind that. I
Yeah.
kind of like that, the filibuster rule, but I know that probably makes me the enemy of the people around here.
Well, I
But,
don't know. I just, the whole thing.
well, no, I'll say, and not to go too wildly national here, but it's the
Yeah.
sort of the structure of the Constitution is
Mhm.
designed to make legislation slow. It's,
Boy, or not
two-thirds
happening
majority.
at all.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
not
It's like,
happening at all. Right
yeah,
now, it's not happening at all.
I know. We're kind of in a cultural problem here, suffice to say.
Speaking, the Supreme Court, you read about that?
Yes, I did. Yes.
Neil Gorsuch not wearing a mask and how that's causing all, if
know.
that's also going to get really, oh my gosh.
It's
never
like,
mind. Yeah.
well, can't the Supreme Court justices just file a lawsuit and take it to a higher court? Oh no, there is none. They're the Supreme Court.
I know. There's like, it's
That's
not
right.
good.
They got to appeal to God.
That's
the only available option now.
Unbelievable. That's just not good.
One of the things that I think is certainly going to be coming up in this coming council term, it has to, is questions about the city charter.
Yep.
All right. As we all know, last year, there were ballot questions that made 3 changes to the Plan E charter. Oh, and by the way, for those who've never seen it, this is in my vast collection of my archives. This is
Special Commission on.
This is a Special Commission on Taxation and Public Expenditures, which is hardly a really good description.
Yeah.
But it's about city manager government and proportional representation. This is the document, the original document.
Okay. Oh,
that was from the legislature that actually lays out the parameters of the Plan E charter.
1930.
This is from February of 1938. Yeah, and this was passed by the legislature later that year, and that established the Plan E charter, which had it was made it a local option, the 5th charter option at the time for cities, and actually later that year, there was an effort to vote it in Cambridge, and it failed. But it prevailed in 1940, largely because of the desire to have a city manager form of government that would be more efficient and
less political.
Less political, addressing issues of political patronage, but also addressing issues of what you might loosely call good government. The tax rates had been screaming out of sight, largely because of things like political patronage and putting a lot of people on the payroll during the Depression. And there were downsides to that, including sawing the tops off of buildings in order to save on your taxes.
That's what happened on Mass Ave.
A lot of Central Square. There were 4-story buildings that became 2-story buildings and less for many decades to follow, all because of kind of screwball taxation rules and kind of not a great system of government. So there were reasons why the charter was adopted eventually. The proportional representation part of it.
That's unique to us, right?
Yeah, well, that was the original Plan E
but some
charter included proportional representation.
Oh, okay.
And there were, I think, at one point up to 13 cities in Massachusetts that actually had pure Plan E charters with proportional representation. We are the only one remaining. There's still some Plan E cities that are now modified Plan E cities like Worcester and Lowell. Who still have at-large city councils, but they're not elected by proportional representation.
But they
have city managers,
mayors. But they have elected.
They modified the charters to have directly elected mayors, and for the most part, at least I know they have that in Worcester. Actually, I don't know they have that in Lowell. Do they have that in Lowell? I
don't
should know
know.
that.
It'd be
But I
interesting.
know in Worcester they do. And in spite of the statements by then Mayor Tim Murray of
Ah,
Worcester that
yeah,
there is absolutely no conflict. We get along, as he was mayor at the time, and
yeah,
we
yeah,
have no problem whatsoever, no conflict with the city manager.
yeah.
That was absolute falsehoods.
Interesting.
He was actually part of a group that was actually trying to change the charter to go to a strong mayor form of the government, even while he was saying that to me.
That's funny. I
So
know, that's funny.
yeah,
Robert, wait, stop a minute. I want to ask you, Brookline has a town manager and a town meeting.
yep,
What form of government is that? Because they do not
that's
have. an
town
elected
meeting form
mayor.
of government. I mean,
So
there's
it's a different, it's not, they don't have an elected mayor either.
right. There's a difference between town government and city government.
Oh, right, they're a town and not a city,
Right.
which is
So
part of the. Okay,
Cambridge was a
right.
town until
Ah, okay, right.
1846, and then became a city in
I see.
1846. And
Okay. That
and
makes sense,
I have
right.
the 50th anniversary book, the 75th
Wow,
anniversary
okay,
book, even the
yeah,
centennial stuff. Yeah, that's why
wow,
I'm
okay,
kind of a fan of it all. So now, as we know, last year there was some movement to
yes.
review
Change
the
charter,
charter,
right.
which led to 3 ballot questions, one having to do with city council approval of appointments, city manager
Boards and
appointments to boards and
commissions, yeah.
commissions, but
Mhm.
badly written so that it's not at
Yep.
all clear what boards and
What,
commissions it applies to.
exactly, right,
And furthermore, there has not yet been any established rules as to what kind of review process and protocols there would
I
be.
know,
So presumably the current city council will have to draft some city council rules for how to do this. I mean, do they get farmed out to individual council committees? What happens, right?
oh,
Do appointments from the Conservation Commission get referred to the Health and Environment Committee? No, none of these rules have been established, which I find sad, but it's the way it is. So that was one of them. One other one was relatively benign, just required an annual review of the city manager, which can take 5 minutes or it could take 5 weeks, right?
right,
Nobody, honestly, I think that could just turn into a formality, or unless people want to make an issue of
yeah.
it.
And like you
Uh,
have always said, they always had the power to review the city manager anytime they
Yeah,
wanted.
that's right. From
Yeah.
my point of view, that
Yeah.
that ballot question was moot.
Yeah.
It added nothing. It changed nothing. But the
Third
third one had to do with charter review as a regular thing. So yeah, we had charter review last year, which led to these 3 questions and these changes.
Mhm.
But that third ballot question calls for a
10
charter
year.
review every 10 years, beginning this year.
Okay, so this year
Right.
we're going to have a charter review.
Yeah, now, I haven't yet heard any talk about how the city council would go about doing this.
Which is
Uh,
interesting
one-
because they also have to select the city manager and they kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah, right.
Hello.
So, yeah, I mean, I don't know
Yeah.
that this group is particularly adept at heavy lifting. So,
Well,
but
they'll
they're
farm it
laymen.
out, maybe to the Collins Center again. I don't know.
Well, they
seems,
could, I suppose.
well, who pays for that if they farm it out to the Collins Center, if it's their initiative? Did
Yeah,
they
I
have a
think
budget for that?
there
Who
would be a
paid for
city
it last
council.
time?
Well, the city council put in an order, and then the manager basically came up
Oh,
and
he has
wrote
to
a
come
check
up with
to
the
it.
money
Yeah,
for it.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
all right.
exactly.
So that's what
So,
it would do. Okay.
right. So where is that going to go? It's not at all clear. I mean, one of the ways this is supposed to happen in theory, but I doubt it, is that there's supposed to be a charter review committee or commission formed.
Right.
Oh,
Right. That's right. That said that in the language. Yeah.
Yeah, and approved by the city council. But how would such a committee be
Right.
formed?
Yeah.
Would it, I mean, could
Yeah.
it be like, well, okay, 9 councilors, each one of you guys gets to pick one? No, I don't think it would be that way, but it could be.
Yeah.
Would the criteria for being appointment to this one be that you had some familiarity with charter change, or is it simply that you're in tight with certain councilors, right? I don't know. Nobody's really talked about it yet, and maybe that's for good reason, because the opportunity hasn't happened yet. But it's
Right.
going to have to happen at some point this year. and it could get weird or it could get good. You know, I mean, if they decide to sort of bring in people who really are being thoughtful about the whole of the planning charter, including the proportional representation
Yeah.
part of it, the notions about whether we should have directly elected mayors, should we have an at-large city council consisting of 9 members elected
All right, but-
at large, or
all right,
should
but
we
let-
have district councilors?
Okay, all right, but let me ask you something. When Envision was started, how did those committees get formed? Didn't the people that
City
were
manager appointments.
really?
Yes.
So, you applied to the city manager to be
Yes.
on those working
Yeah, and you were
committees?
vetted by people within the community development department.
The
Right.
community, not by Envision people, because didn't they
No,
hire
because
an
it didn't.
outside?
No, Envision didn't exist yet. So
Oh,
there had been
I
back
thought it was,
some year. Actually, I should know this year, but I don't remember it off the top of my
yeah.
head. It was very controversial when Envision started. Before they came up with the name
Yeah.
Envision, there was a move by 3 councilors, including, I believe, Dennis Carlone.
Uh-huh.
I could guess and say
Jan
Nadine
Devlin?
Mazin and another.
Hmm.
It may have actually predated Jan.
Okay,
And you know, and they wanted to basically have a master plan with
right,
particular focus on Alewife area.
right.
And then they wanted, Dennis Carlone wanted this to be shepherded under the ordinance committee,
Oh,
which he was chair of, or at least
Right.
co-chair of at the time, I believe.
he was? That
Yeah.
guy?
And then we said, well, wait a minute, we have a little bit of a problem with that, because if you're actually directing a process, which is then being run by within the community development department, you know,
Yeah.
with city staff, then you have
Yeah.
a situation where you have city council who's directing city staff.
Which is not.
That's a
supposed to happen.
no-go under
Right,
Plan E.
okay,
So, so there was an alternative proposal by, I believe, David Marr, maybe Mark McGovern, and one other counselor,
uh-huh,
that would put it under the auspices of the community development department rather than the ordinance committee, which is exactly what needed to
should
happen.
have been, yeah,
I think David might have been mayor at the time, but I don't remember for sure.
yeah,
And then that's kind of what had happened. Then they started off with something they called the community conversations,
okay.
which was after the city had hired Util.
Util,
Yeah.
okay,
There were 3 companies, I think, bidding on the contract. So they did that, and they did community conversations, and then during that, then they did the appointments to and they came up with the name Envision Cambridge.
okay.
And yeah, and I got to be on the
You
advisory
applied,
committee.
yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. And then once that was formed, they also formed subcommittees, so I was on one of the subcommittees as well. So yeah, so that was under the old Plan E system, right? Definitely
Okay,
city manager appointments to those committees. Now, it would be interesting if you were to, and this gets back to the whole charter change question.
yeah,
If you were to have done that today,
yeah,
and then the city manager then made appointments after the community development
Yeah.
had vetted them for who should serve on
yeah,
this this is not a
Yeah.
standing committee to exist
Right.
forever. It was a
Right.
purpose committee.
task,
Would the city council have had veto power over who got to be serving on the Envision Cambridge committee?
well, but
You
these
know?
are separate, these are ad hoc committees that don't last a
But-
long time, so, but that's not
Yes, but
defined, you're right.
In the language of those charter
Yes.
questions last year, there was no
Yes.
reference to ad hoc versus
Well-
standing versus with those with regulatory.
Didn't it, what did it
roles
say?
versus
Didn't it say boards and,
advisory.
didn't
It
say
just said
and
boards and
commissions?
commissions.
Oh,
so
so
you could
one could
argue
argue that that's not.
This was a
doesn't
commission.
apply.
You were appointed by the city manager to this board,
Yeah.
advisory, this Envision Cambridge advisory board.
Well, but
You can call it a board, a commission, a committee.
But what if it was a
same
task
thing.
force? What if it was then?
Tell
is
me
that
why a
fine?
task force is not a committee, a commission. It is. These are just the semantics,
I don't-
really.
Well, somebody's going to argue that. I don't know.
Well,
Anyway,
again, this is the problem when you're extremely vague in the language. I mean, honestly, maybe they had to be, because if they said this only applies to boards and commission, then you just rename the planning board, the planning task force,
True, right.
right?
Yeah,
You know,
I
we're
mean,
not subject to the ordinance,
I mean,
the charter
people,
change anymore.
people want more influence on the planning board and the Board of Zoning Appeal
I think
and the
ultimately,
historical commission. That's really
yeah,
where they're aimed.
I mean, I think a lot what was driving this
yeah.
was more concerns about some of the regulatory
Yep,
authority
right.
boards rather than, you know, so, I mean, in the most recent
Yeah.
city council meeting, there were actually two communications from the city manager. One was appointing David Kale to the
Right,
Board of Trustees of the Cambridge Health Alliance.
right,
Didn't seem to be subject to council approval,
right. hmm
just went on through.
Yeah,
There were also appointments to the Peace Commission, which somewhat cryptically, it did say when the city clerk, you know, brought up the minutes of the meeting, order adopted, which in the past, it would have said placed on file, right?
huh,
Meaning there's nothing it's nothing for the council to do other than read the communication, no action
uh-huh.
required.
Interesting.
Now, technically speaking, maybe the new language will be order adopted when the council just
Well,
lets
we'll
it go.
have to see from here on
We'll
out.
have to see.
Yeah,
So this is the implementation of the current changes that were as a
hmm
result of the ballot questions.
right.
But what's to happen next is really, that's the bigger question, right? Uh, you know, I mean, as everybody knows, I was not a fan of the change of
Right.
the boards and commission appointments, but
No,
the but you know, is there going to be a movement now to in the midst of a city manager search
I
to
know.
change the
Yeah,
form of government to
right.
something other than a city manager form of
I mean, who's
government,
going to
which
want to apply for that? You know, I mean,
yeah, I mean,
they don't know where they're going.
the
Yeah.
juxtaposition of this is just confusing.
Uh-huh.
As I say, you know, there's absolutely no notion about how this charter review commission would be formed, right? What are there qualifications necessary, or you know, is it just you're friendly with a counselor? We don't know. And the other thing too is there any consensus floating around town about what kinds of other changes might be in the offing? You know, I mean, I've heard for years some people say, you know, oh, we should get rid of this city manager form of government. This is an unelected person or whatever. And I said, but of course, that's the whole point. The
I
fact that the
know.
person
What
is
it, I mean,
unelected means they're not
yeah,
accountable to the political people.
yeah.
They're supposed to be good
Well,
managers
they're only accountable to
to
some
the
extent.
council.
Yeah.
They're
Well, to
they're
the
accountable
council.
to
Yeah,
the
right.
people who hire them. That's it. You
Right.
know.
Well, that's true. I see what you're saying.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was the whole idea. And in fact,
Yeah.
there are firewalls built into the Plan E charter that make it
hmm
a felony for councilors to bypass the manager to try and lean on city departments. I mean, that's how important it was, felt to be back in 1938,
Yeah.
correctly, I believe, that you should just really absolutely prohibit elected officials from being involved in management functions. You know, people seem to be forgetting that now because I think so much now is people have a rather twisted view of democracy where they think
hmm
of democracy as saying
Right.
we elected those people, therefore they should have power. It's all about
Right.
power.
I know.
It's not about power. It's about governance, and governance is
Yeah.
not just about power,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But you know, it's kind of hard to explain the subtleties to people sometimes, but I don't actually know. I mean, I've heard some people argue that, well, maybe instead of having 9 at-large counselors, we should have and I'll just make up numbers. Maybe we should have 5 district-based counselors
But you know,
and then
in a
4 at
sense,
large.
I know, but in some ways, the way RPR works, we sort of have people that represent a certain area of the city. Like Toomey always kind of got East Cambridge. You know, Craig Kelly got North
Yeah.
Cambridge. I mean, there's sort of a already, but how would that change?
You know, I think I would make the case that proportional representation, when working well,
Uh-huh.
and not being driven by single issue politics,
Yeah.
when it's really all about representativeness and representation,
It should go
you know,
beyond
independent of,
right.
you know, single hot button issues, right?
Yeah.
Which come and go, right? Then yeah, it absolutely has the potential to be proportionally representative in many ways, geographically,
Right.
gender,
Right.
religious affiliations, and issues, right? So it's kind of like a statistical snapshot when it's working well.
Yeah.
You know, I think it gets distorted and, you know, really confounded when you have, if a municipal election is to be entirely decided by an issue of the day, like a bicycle pledge, or
trees,
whether
bicycles, yeah,
the people from
Yeah.
ABC versus CCC are having
Right.
their endless spat,
yeah,
right?
right,
Then
yeah.
I don't know that proportional representation delivers in the way that it ideally should.
Well, and how does it work with slates then too?
Well, exactly. Right. So in other
Yeah.
words, if the only way you can get the blessing of one of the endorsing organizations is to agree
Yeah.
with them on the one issue that counts to them,
Right.
then basically, and then if everybody votes based on slate affiliation or whatever, which they don't, but a lot of people do. And actually, a lot of people do these days, largely because of the lack of information. So they're looking for guidance. So they look to whatever's
they're not
out there.
following all the, as people say, they're not following all these meetings. They don't attend,
Exactly.
they only
Exactly.
get their listserv alerts about, oh, you better go to the planning board meeting, which is, I guess, happening right now.
That's right. I think they're
issue.
talking about
Yeah. The whole
changes to multifamily zoning
Exactly.
possibilities. It's an ongoing discussion. I'm glad the
Yep.
planning board is doing things that way, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're not just sort of meeting in order to decide on a petition. They're actually having a conversation, which years ago is how the planning board and the planning department that preceded it used to do business. They would actually produce studies. I mean, I have some on my shelves here,
Okay.
where there would be ongoing detailed discussion involving members of the planning board.
So, all right. So
actually planning.
Yeah. So what they're discussing then, it's not a petition, but it's an ongoing discussion about whether we should change something. In other words, no one.
The political people and the petitioners certainly are. They're all waiting. They want to put in things to, eliminate all single family zoning, or to densify or to allow 13-story buildings along the corridors is one of the proposals I've heard floated. There's a lot of things that are sort of watching and waiting here. I think the community development department is probably, it's fair to say, are trying to get a little ahead of the curve this time by introducing some different ways of thinking about planning and zoning.
So
like
this has come from. So this has come from.
Really, it's really coming out of the department, out of the
all
planning department. And I think that potentially this is a good thing. I'm not in any way endorsing any of the ideas that are being floated, by the way. I just, in terms of process, I'd rather see it that way rather than have a couple of people in so-and-so's kitchen come up with a zoning petition and then try and bulldoze their way through. I'm honestly, I'm sick of that. I'm just really sick of it. I mean, if we have a planning department, we should be using the planning department. And if we have elected officials, they should be listening to their people and having a real conversation rather than trying to strong arm things, we got to fix a few broken things around here. That's true. By the way, not that I want to dwell on it, but one part of the planning charter is the proportional representation portion of it.
Right.
And if you may recall that back, I think when Dennis Carlone was first elected, which I think was 2013, within a month or so, I think there had been a controversy about the Cincinnati method.
We're talking about,
as part of the
surplus votes.
Which has always been sort of an embarrassingly difficult piece to explain to people about why we have a semi-random election system where if you shuffled the ballots, you could technically get different results. Nobody's particularly loved that. So there was a move by Dennis at the time, suggesting the city look into it. And there were some requirements that would require actual changes to the charter before they could be implemented.
Oh, okay.
So that's why it kind of ground to a halt. I know, because I got called into the manager's office about this, and with the city solicitor and people from the elections department. So there was, you'd have to actually move to do either a special act or something like that. So I'm only mentioning this here because if they are going to be having conversations about changing the charter,
that should be brought up then.
If our particular, I'm not talking about changing away from proportional representation.
No, but the way we deal with the.
Just this sort of the mathy part of that. Then I think that should be on the table. as one possible alteration, is
Okay.
just a minor modification so that the semi-randomness of our system can be gone once and for all.
Okay, but you on your site you do go into this.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want.
Didn't you run some tabulations that said it wouldn't be that much different?
Generally speaking,
Yeah.
generally speaking, it would not be all that much different. It is true. There's, I think, actually, I'll only point it out here.
Yeah, we only
and
have
again,
a minute and a half, so.
Yeah, so I don't want to kind of dwell on this, but I would just want to at least point it out here. So I together with a lot of narrative about what the actual changes would be, I actually just put up on a website the actual results of the most recent city council election, November 2021, how you would do it if you were to change it to the so-called fractional transfer. But there are two variations, one that allows, what we call overvotes, no need to get into that now.
Yeah.
And one that bypasses overvotes, which is currently what we do on our system. We don't permit them.
I see.
You elect exactly the same people in more or less the same way. It's not a radical change in that sense, but I wanted to at least put that out there to have an example for people to understand. So that's available, and I did that in response to actually just some requests from somebody on the Cambridge Force listserv, and I've been meaning to do it for a while anyway.
Yeah, no, that's
so
good.
I said, just put it up there. I said, look, if you people ever want to think about this, and you might as well start your reading right there, and can call me a jerk if you want, but
no.
But I think that it's in a year when we are perhaps going to talk about possible revisions, I would hope that this would at least be on the list of possibilities.
Good.
And then I'm sure there'll be some sort of bigger changes some people may want as well. But I hope people will take some time to read that a little bit.
You gave us all enough to look at. So
that's right. That's right.
We will not be meeting. We'll be meeting in February. Our next
we'll be back
first Tuesday in February.
That's right.
And let's hope for the best with Omicron and all that.
And happy Groundhog's Day.
Oh, right. Yes.